Please welcome the Mayor of South Yorkshire, UK, Oliver Copard, Senior Counselor for Technology and Economic Growth to Secretary Raimondo at the U.S. Department of Commerce, Zoe Baird, Mayor of Columbus, Ohio, USA, Andrew Gintner, with D.C. Bureau Chief at Bloomberg News, Peggy Collins.
Good morning, everyone. It's a privilege to be here with you. I thought we would start with Mayor Copard because he has traveled the furthest from England to be with us today. Thank you so much, Mayor. So, Mayor, you oversee a region in the UK that is the first investment zone in the UK and also has received an initial private sector investment from Boeing recently of about 80 million pounds, I think it is. So can you share with us a little bit about what already that has meant for the economy in your region?
Yeah, so South Yorkshire is not just the first investment zone. South Yorkshire was the place that pioneered steel manufacturing. We were the world's first advanced manufacturing innovation district. So we also are now the UK's first investment zone. That's essentially an £80 million, about $100 million package of support from the UK government, which allows us to focus our strengths in advanced manufacturing, particularly our research strengths. And through that money, we've been able to bring in Boeing. So Boeing's only manufacturing facility in Europe is in South Yorkshire, and the second facility was as a result of the investment zone. So now it's getting to a point where if you're in advanced manufacturing, and you're not in South Yorkshire, that's your problem, not my problem. So we're pretty excited about that.
Well, Mayor Ginther, when we bring it back to the U.S., your state of Ohio has also been a big beneficiary of this huge shift we've seen in industrial policy in the U.S., probably the biggest shift since World War II. And in Ohio, you've seen investments by Intel to build a new chips manufacturing center and then also a new battery plant. So can you tell us a little bit about how that's going in terms of jobs that are being created and other investments in your region?
Yeah, it's been pretty transformational. We already had the fastest growing economy in the Midwest, creating 27,000 jobs over the last 8 years. And so 3,000 permanent full-time jobs with Intel and 2,500 with the Honda LG plant to our west. And so an incredible time. We really are trying to move with an intensity around growth, but being purposeful and intentional, because we know that growth without purpose and intention and a plan sometimes can be an accelerant to disparities and inequities. So along with job creation and workforce development, partnering with our community college, we're making huge commitments around housing and transit to make sure that the workforce that we're building are able to access these jobs. Because of course, for the permanent jobs at Intel and Honda, there are about 10 jobs being created for every one job there with suppliers and vendors. So it's going to require all of us to do things differently. We were rewriting our zoning code for the first time in 70 years to embrace density and height, which, as you can imagine, in the Midwest is going to have its challenges with culture, but we're making our way. But being a workforce hub identified by the First Lady, we're grateful for that. None of this would have happened without the CHIPS Act, and so I want to thank the President and the Biden administration for making that a reality.
Well, you mentioned the word workforce a couple of times there, and Zoe, I want to bring you in because you've had so much experience in your career around the workforce, and you work now for the Secretary of Commerce that's deploying so much of the funds around the CHIPS Act. Can you talk to us a little bit about the federal government, how the federal government is trying to help prepare the workforce for some of these new jobs?
Sure, it's such a pleasure to be here with you today. So while I am now working for the federal government, I used to represent state and local governments in the Supreme Court, and so I'm a big believer in what you do and know that we can't do any of this without you. The CHIPS Act has been mentioned. It's an extraordinary investment, $52 billion on the part of the federal government in developing the semiconductor industry in your communities, but more importantly, those resources are meant to be a catalyst for private investment. And I think you're seeing, as was mentioned in Ohio, enormous private investment to bring this critical industry back to the U.S. We really dropped the ball and let this go offshore, and this is one of the areas where the president is deeply committed to reinvigorating critical industries in the U.S. and in communities. And the workforce component of this is enormously important. The CHIPS and Science Act will create 100,000 construction jobs. It'll create 90,000 technicians, people to operate the fabs. Most of these jobs don't require a 4-year college degree, but we also need to accelerate the number of engineers that we have so that we can continue to be on the forefront, not just in this sector, but in other critical technology sectors. So it's really a privilege for us at the Commerce Department and in the federal government to develop these programs, and I know you heard Ms. Landrieu talk about the infrastructure programs in the same vein. It's really a privilege for us to develop these programs in conjunction with local government, because you're going to need to create the sectoral partnerships that will enable people to get the training they need, training that leads to jobs. Secretary Raimondo likes to say, we're not in it for train and pray. We're really focused, and those of you who've looked at the CHIPS Notice of Funding Opportunity and the many other funding programs that we have out of the Inflation Reduction Act and otherwise, all of these have very robust workforce investments in them in conjunction with local communities, encouraging the creation of sectoral partnerships so businesses are identifying the jobs that are needed, the training providers are able to bring forward the training opportunities, and you're able to connect all of this so that people know which training to take, and that training leads to real jobs. So you're at the point of the spear, and we're really privileged to work with you.
So Mayor Carbo, let me go back to you on this front. You know, my colleagues at CityLab have been doing a lot of reporting about the efforts in the UK to level up, as you say, parts of the country and region that have been left behind somewhat, particularly in northern UK where you are. But it's been a challenge. So can you talk to us a little bit about what challenges you're seeing to getting the success that you want to have there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the so-called levelling up program that the government have been pursuing is designed to try and make the north of the UK just as prosperous and productive, importantly, as the south of the country. And at the moment, that just isn't the case. Now, the government promised us a load of transport infrastructure, which hasn't quite materialised. But on things like the investment zone, we have seen that investment in places like South Yorkshire. So we're determined that through advanced manufacturing, in the same way as places in this country, we can regenerate our economies and our communities and deliver that right throughout our communities. So I was in St. Louis just last week and over the weekend talking to colleagues in St. Louis about their approach to advanced manufacturing, being very similar with Mayor Jones, being very similar to the challenges that we face, because this isn't just about levelling up the country in the UK, it's also about levelling up my region. So the jobs and opportunities through that investment zone and on the world's first advanced manufacturing innovation district have to be just as accessible to those people that are adjacent to that site, which come from, it's surrounded by some of Northern Europe's poorest communities, a place called Darnall, Attercliffe. So I have to make sure that not just that the world sees that South Yorkshire is leading on advanced manufacturing, but that my own community sees that we're leading on advanced manufacturing and that they can access those opportunities and stay near and go far.
Mayor Ginther, you mentioned a couple of things when you were talking earlier that are critical to success. Housing you mentioned. What are some of the things you're doing to attract workers in this very tight labor market, like affordable housing, childcare, which I know is a big part of the CHIPS Act? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think Oliver hit right on it, and that is, and I think this is true for communities around the country, but really the world, the communities that are acting regionally as opposed to, you know, in their city's own specific interests. There are many communities you go to where cities and counties don't get along, cities and suburban communities aren't able to work together, and I think the communities around the world that are growing and thriving are those that are acting regionally. So the two job centers that you've shared here today are in adjacent counties. They're not actually in Franklin County where the city of Columbus is, but because the battery plant and Intel are both in adjacent counties. but obviously transformational projects for all of Central Ohio. So we were part of bringing utilities, because there's a huge water demand, obviously, for both of those, and we could help provide that for a commitment to shared revenue around income tax revenue, which is how basic city services are funded in Columbus, as well as commitments to workforce and to housing. I think what we've discovered is that our community college, and Intel has a proud history of this in Phoenix and other places around the country, is a great place for us to partner. And luckily, we're blessed with a great community college. There's not a bigger advocate for community colleges in America than the First Lady, who's a community college professor. And so using Columbus State, we've unveiled something called the Columbus Promise, and that is every graduate of Columbus City Schools can receive an associate's degree or 2 years of training debt-free through Columbus State Community College. One of the other things we're doing is really trying, because we talked about skilled trades, 7,000 construction jobs at Intel, 3,000 for Honda. And even after these projects are complete, there'll be thousands of skilled tradespeople required to be on these sites to maintain them into the future. And so in partnership with the county, we've unveiled Building Futures, which really tries to focus on getting folks that haven't necessarily been welcome in the trades in the past, women, people of color, even restored citizens that are come back and looking for opportunities to provide for their families. So that's some of the ways, in addition to using some of our rescue plan dollars for childcare. That's been absolutely critical. We know that there is nearly 2 million women that left the workforce at the beginning of the pandemic that have not come back. And a major, major issue is having affordable, high-quality childcare.
So Zoe, the mayor was just talking about some of the things they're learning as they tried to scale up some of the workers. When you think about our allies and what you've learned from the way they're approaching the workforce, what are some of the takeaways that you have? Because this is an issue in terms of the shifting industrial policy that we're not only seeing in the US, but we're seeing globally.
Oh, it's very true. There's no country in the world that has developed a system of training their adult workforce. And so we're all challenged at the same time to figure this out. We've created, when the president first was elected, he went to Europe and he said to the Europeans, let's create a trade and technology council and collaborate on building the jobs in technology that are going to matter in the future and building our industries and our common approaches to this. And out of that, we created a Talent for Growth task force where we're collaborating with the Europeans and trying to learn from the successes in your communities and the challenges in your communities, as well as in theirs. And one of the things that is very clear is we all have the same challenge, as the mayor was saying, of getting women into the technology workforce. Women don't see themselves in these jobs. Women don't understand how to access the training, which is true generally for the population. But if we can't get women into these jobs that are going to be significant in the future, first of all, we won't have enough people for these jobs. And secondly, we'll miss enormous talent that could be contributing and benefiting from the growth of these technologies. So one of the things we've done in the implementation of the CHIPS Act, which has been alluded to here, is that we've required childcare for the major investments that we're making. Because if we don't have childcare, we won't have women in these jobs. And we want this to be a primary area of women's contribution. The same is true for the whole range of attracting young people into these jobs. You know, the semiconductor industry doesn't have the same cachet as internet service providers. You know, we're trying to get young people to see that when you work in construction these days, you're not necessarily breaking down a brick wall with a sledgehammer, you're operating a robot. It's really cool. And so we're trying to get people of color to see themselves in these jobs, to create the context and environment in which the diversity of our populations want to work. America's great strength has always been the diversity of its population, and we really need to drive that through our present investments for the future. You know, people are concerned about AI and other technologies that are becoming more and more visible to them. And we want people to feel and see and experience the enormous prospect that they have individually in participating in these sectors. And you'll know in your own communities that over 50 community colleges have now developed semiconductor training programs that, you know, didn't exist before. So the educational institutions are becoming aware of the training opportunities, the new needs. We're trying to get rapid and affordable training for people and collaborating with our allies in doing this because it is a global problem.
Mayor Coppard, would you like to jump in here about, you know, how it's going in terms of pulling in some of these workers from the younger generations or more diverse populations where you are?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more with what we've just heard, because that absolutely is the challenge. As much as we have some incredible facilities in South Yorkshire, and we absolutely do, giving those communities that are in my region access to those facilities is a whole other challenge. And that is a skills challenge, absolutely. It's also a transport challenge. And there is also a more fundamental health challenge in there. 1/3 of our productivity challenge in South Yorkshire is down to poor health outcomes and health inequalities. We have a 20-year healthy life expectancy gap in South Yorkshire. So you can't work in an advanced manufacturing facility if you're simply not well enough to access those jobs, if you can't get there on public transport, or if you don't have the skills. So we're doing a huge amount of work investing in all of those areas in order to give everybody the opportunity to access those facilities that we're so proud of in our building. I'm determined to build not just a bigger economy, but a better economy. And that has to be about making sure that everybody can access those opportunities. And if there's anybody in the room that wants to help us with those challenges, I'm all ears.
Well, we only have a couple of minutes left, but Mayor, I wanted to come back to you and ask the same question of both of you as well. When you think about trying to build a better economy, which you're doing in your region, what excites you most about what's happening right now?
Well, there's so many things, and I think it's important for us to say as well, you know, the CHIPS Act and bringing chip manufacturing, reshoring that to the United States is great for economic development and job creation, but it's also a matter of national and economic security. So you think about back in 1990, about 37% of the chips that were made worldwide were produced in the United States. I believe last year it was 12. And so if we've learned anything over the last few years, there are a lot of forces in the world that are not interested in our national and economic security. And so this is a matter for us to move, you know, just, you know, here in the United States and with our allies around the world to continue to build and own the future, not only creating great jobs, more pathways to the middle class, but also to protect our national and economic security. So workforce is going to continue to be a top priority for that.
Zoe, to you, what's most exciting to you right now about trying to build a better economy broadly in the U.S.?
I think what's really exciting is what's happening all over the country, whether it's advanced manufacturing or semiconductors or clean energy industries. There's a vibrancy, and as the president said, he's very committed to rebuilding the economy from the bottom up and the middle out. And you see that from all the communities in which you work. This is not the federal government telling you what to do. It's creating opportunity along with the industries and the employers that enable you to create the kinds of sectoral partnerships that are rebuilding your community in the way that's appropriate and strongest for the people in your own community. So there's enormous diversity in what's happening in the implementation of these programs, and it's because of how you're leading in your communities, and that's what's really exciting to see.
And Mayor Coppard, can you bring us home, but via the UK?
Look, we're hugely excited by the opportunities that our innovation capability, our advanced manufacturing can bring to our communities. South Yorkshire, in common with, I think, a number of places in the US, not least our friends in St. Louis, has had a tough time post-industrially. We were a post-industrial community. And yet what we're now seeing is that through advanced manufacturing technology, digital health tech, we're able to create a new future for our communities. I was elected 18 months ago on a promise to restore the pride, purpose and prosperity of South Yorkshire. And I think through advanced manufacturing, the investment zone that we now have, we're absolutely on a path to be able to deliver on that promise.
Well, Well, thank you so much to our esteemed panelists, and thanks to all of you for being here today.
Thank you.